and good day, and welcome to Practical Shamanism Part 4. This is about smudge. This part is going to be a little less time-wise than the other parts of Practical Shamanism, mostly because there is a book that I've written called the Book of Smudge, which is available on our website, as well as I've talked about smudge and the various parts, I think, in every single episode. So today I just wanted to talk about some of my favorite parts of smudge and what I find important about it. But before we begin anything, I would like to light my own smudge and welcome you into this space whenever you're listening to this, whenever you're watching this, whenever you're able to join me. Feel welcome. And this smudge is for you and for myself. So, as per usual, the wooden matches. It's very important for me. I don't have a feather fan with me because it's just little old me today. And we talked about feather fans anyway already. So I like my smudge just as a nice way of beginning my day. And I like to always get the back of my neck. That's one of our vulnerable places, anywhere along our 6. So I like to come up over top of my head and just get this. And if I am working with feather fans or if I'm working with somebody, I'll take the smudge over and I'll smack the back of my neck with the feathers just as a way of further cleansing it or just kind of knocking things loose. And I like to smudge what I'm talking about, or, I've talked about the way to use feather fans for opening up space and smudge to open up space. So this is really for just opening up our time together, welcoming you here with me, and hoping that we have a good opportunity to learn together. So I'm going to put that off to the side. It will smudge for a few more minutes, burn for a few more minutes, and then that will be it. I have set up the very first part of this are the 4 smudges for the 4 directions. And I like to put sweetgrass in the east because although it's picked green, it often turns yellow. It can stay green. I have some sweetgrass pieces that are green. I'm certain there are people who can tell me if there's a difference in the type of grass or what the difference is. I'm assuming it's a different type of sweetgrass or vanilla grass. So it is in the east because the east is the grandmother's, the east is yellow, and it is a smell for east. I like to use sweetgrass to bring in good energy, to clear energy out, but I think sage, from my perspective, is better for that than sweetgrass is. Sweetgrass is a beautiful beginning for opening yourself up, clearing yourself off before you go into sacred space. However, again, I like the scent of it. I don't use it very often in my smudges. I find that it is a very sacred grass, and I use it only with the most with the most revered and sacred intentions. Not that smudge isn't sacred and intended every way. I have a sacred spot or a very soft spot in my heart for sweetgrass and for the beautiful smell that it is, and the grandmothers who have grown it and who have shown countless people to braid what the braids mean, the different parts of the braids. The second part for south is cedar. I use cedar in 2 different forms. I use cedar as wood. This was collected off a forest floor in BC. It was in a clear-cut place. So I wanted to gather some of the energy of destruction, and I wanted to bring it into my house, and I wanted to see if I could use my power and my intention for creation out of chaos, creation out of destruction, the sowing of the seeds or the planting of the seeds in order to grow again in the south. It is a red thing. It's associated with fire, which is the south. The leaves themselves, it's very repugnant in a really good way in any type of smudge. I like to also, if I'm camping and I'm camping where there are cedars, I like to add it to the beginning of my fire to welcome the fire spirits in, to ask them to join me in my evening, whether I'm cooking food over the fire or whatever it is I'm doing. So if I'm in a place where there is excess sage or cedar, then I will like to put it onto my fire. As I said, I find it a lovely way to open up space, especially if you're in a campground or even, back road camping like I do myself. So this sits in the south, and it is one of the 4 smudges. I've talked about that in the book of Smudge. I'm pretty sure we talked about that in other parts of Practical Shamanism. Then now there's you can place, from my perspective, you do whatever you feel is comfortable. There are traditions which place tobacco in the north because tobacco is of the grandfathers. Most tobacco, when it's picked, is black or very, very dark brown. And some medicine wheels have black in the west and white in the north. For me, it's different. I have green in the west and I have black in the north. But I wanted to show you that there's always variations. We know that there's many variations, and because I work with a medicine wheel that is not associated with any particular tribe, but with Sun Bear, I am able to work the medicine wheel not only with his vision in mind, but also with furthering it as how it would work well with my spirits and my sacredness. I do like to put tobacco in the west because it does remind me of the grandfathers, and I also really like to put it in the north because the north for me is black. So the use of sage in the west, we'll talk about sage in the west then. It is, for me, sage is grandmother energy. And it is white. Some of it is white. When you pick it, the underside of it can look very white. There are different types of, I don't know how many types of sages there are, but I believe there's over 100 different types of sage. So there's going to be great variation in the colors, size of the leaf, the pungence of what it smells like. Some sage doesn't smell very good when you burn it. Some sage smells amazing when you burn it. There's bee sage, there's California white sage, there's the sage that I pick, but I don't know the name of it in southern Alberta. And sage is the energy that I use for the base of my smudges. For every single smudge, the predominant composite is sage. The dominant powder is sage. The dominant plant material is sage. And it is into the sage base that I add everything else. I use tobacco if I am working with the spirits of the soil, of the land that I work with. Because I'm on Treaty 6 land, it is Cree land. There are many offerings and relationships between the people that live here now and tobacco. Their medicine wheel is black, and the tobacco in the north anyway, and the tobacco therefore would go in the north. If I am doing ceremonies for clearing the space, if there is an intrusion or unhealthy land, if there has been chemical spills, oil spills, incredible violence, trauma, I like to use tobacco because I think it takes my prayers and makes them deeper and comes more from the gut of self, and is an offering that the land spirits are familiar with for many generations, and as well as my own feet that walk this path have a relationship to tobacco. And much like sweetgrass, I find it to be in that place of absolute sacredness. I use sparingly because I don't want to become so familiar with the spirit of sweetgrass or tobacco that I take them ever for granted. Cedar I use if I am really trying to create an energy of clearing, like a double clearing. I will then combine the sage and the cedar in that way. Cedar is the color red. I also see it as a grandmother spirit. I guess most of them, for me, are grandmothers, except for tobacco, which is a grandfather. Interesting. Never thought about that till now. Although they can be anything, that's just my story. That doesn't have to be your story. The relationship I find between the sage and the cedar is one of cooperation and intensifying and amplifying the potent energy between them to clear space and to kick shit out, really, is basically how I do see it. I see them as being cooperative in the fierceness that they both do have the ability to access. So this is fierceness in spirits jumping out of the way. Cedar for me is burning up the excess energy in the room, the negative energy in the room, just burning it and transforming it, much like a wildfire would do, or much like a fire. It's destructive, but this would be destructive in a controlled manner to release what is necessary, or tossed out of the room or off the body. If I'm doing a particular ceremony, that would require both of these. So I use them sparingly together because I think they have potent medicine. I think they share very potent energy, and they are good friends as far as I can see. Now, keeping in mind, there are different scents that will linger in the air depending on what you use. So remember that if you're in a space where you don't necessarily want to leave a lingering scent behind you, or if you have scent, if you live with people who are distracted by scent or bothered by scent, what I would recommend that you do is burn a particular bit of each of them, if you have access to them, and let it burn out. Don't mix it with anything else, and just see what it smells like on its own after it's burnt. Leave the room, come back in, and see if you can notice anything. Do try a combination if you have the ability to do that. A little bit of sage, a little bit of sweetgrass, burn them together, see if there's an after scent, so on and so forth. Tobacco for me is a very strong scent. I'm not a smoker, and so to me it's a very strong scent. And while I recognize that the relationship, when I was in South America, the relationship between tobacco and spiritual energy in Peru was like this. And there was a very strong energy. So the tobacco that's actually in this little tiny pouch right here does come from the jungles of Peru. And I use this incredibly sparingly because I don't know very many people that are going to Peru. And I don't know if I'll ever be back. So I like to use it sparingly. I also am very fortunate to have friends who grow or their own tobacco. So it's beautiful, organic, made with love and intention, and grown specifically for sacredness. And you can grow it on your own. I don't know if it's a challenging plant to grow. However, try it. What have you got to lose? Even if you live in an apartment, if you have south or east light, do a little planting. What have you got to lose? If they don't live, they don't live. But if they live, maybe you become like a super awesome tobacco farmer for your community of super awesome friends. So these are the four sacred smudges. So I'm going to move them out of my way. Don't fall, because that's what they like to do. Now, I want to talk about some of my favorite resins. And they come in different colors. They come from different countries. They have relationships from different countries to the power and the potency of each of them, much like the cedar, the sage, the sweetgrass, the tobacco, all have a relationship to the land that they're grown in. These all have a relationship. I know I have spoke about some of these before, so I will be a little bit shorter on explanation, but I will be, this for me is what's coming from the heart. And you can read more about it in the book that is available on our website, Shaman's Way. I'll move this because I believe there may be, something could burn. And that something is my snakeskin. Now, I do not have a snake. I have friends who have beautiful snakes, and I have been gifted with snakeskin many times over the years. And this was a beautiful, incredibly intact skin, right down to the top of the head. You can see where the eyes had been. Anyway, if I'm really working with some, I guess, that energy that is snake-like, so slithery, or has the ability to get out of the way, or slip and slide out. And if I want to bring in incredible intensity or familiarity, or just a smackdown, I will use snakeskin in my smudges. And I will take, it doesn't require much because it is potent energy. Snake is one of those amazing beings that lives in all of the world. So there are water snakes, there are tree snakes, there are snakes that live solely on the ground. They are in every environment, and for me they represent the ability to travel between the worlds because they are involved in all three places of living. They are in tropical areas, they hibernate, they are an incredible group of reptiles that have evolved and stayed sacred and are sacred to many different cultures. So I draw on the power of snake. I draw on the relationship between snake and the goddesses of old. I draw upon snake as the shapeshifter. And I draw upon snake to have the ability to see things in ways that I can never see things. And the ability to see the way that a snake sees in colors and vibrations has a great way of, or another tool to see into the energy that you're walking in, or see into the energy that you're cleansing. And if I get good information from the people that I'm coming to see regarding what's going on in their house, I might add snakeskin to their smudge. What I get other people to do is to send me the floor plan for their houses, and I douse where it is, and this is where I determine what kind of smudge I will need for this particular type of work, because there are various combinations of potent medicines and potent energies that you can combine to do good work. As you know, I mean, we've known this for longer than I've been alive, and surely longer than you've been alive, even if you're longer in the tooth than I am. So if you have the opportunity and the desire to use snakeskin in your smudges, that would be a recommendation for myself. If you are just looking for a good way of seeing into the world that you may not have the opportunity to see into if you hadn't used snake. Well, I also will use snake in a smudge if I'm doing it for intuitive readings or psychic readings. There's also trance postures, and there are some that are dedicated to snake. They're very potent postures, really good. I like where they take you. I like how they work with your body. I've done book reviews on ecstatic body postures, ecstatic trance postures. So go to Shaman's Way if you're looking for an indication of what is a snake posture. I would use snakeskin in a smudge for that. If I'm have an evening coming ahead where I know that the ceremony that I'm doing has aspects of divination or looking for clarity and insight, I will use snakeskin in those as well. So it fits different purposes depending on how you want to see it. Now, one of my favorite resins of all time is frankincense. I love frankincense. It was one of the very first smudges or resins. It was the very first resin that was ever given to me. And I kept the little tiny pieces of it forever. Sometimes I like to hold on to little bits of things for sentimental value. And I kept the seeds. I just called them my little frankincense seeds because they were little beads of frankincense. And I used them sparingly because they were gifted to me by a woman who didn't, have any relationship to my spiritual path, but she did have children who traveled and brought her back some frankincense and thought that I might like it. And that was the very first resin that I received, even before the days, and I received it before the days of acquiring a coffee grinder to make my smudges. So I would use a mortar and pestle and my sage together, and I would grind them together so I could burn the resin. As an aside for resins, I believe I've mentioned this before, but I will mention this again. When you are making a smudge and you use a base of plant materials, I don't use charcoal. I don't like the smell of charcoal, so that's why I like to grind it. That's why I like to use it in a coffee grinder, and then I can light it very simply and very easily with a match, and it goes out on its own. I will tell you that if you use quite a bit of resin in your smudges, when they burn, you will absolutely have a residue. A resin is a residue, and you will have more residue left over, and they're not impossible to clean because when you burn with ceramics, usually they're glazed and you can generally clean them very well, unless you're using something else like a fry pan or something, or a shell. So just be aware that the more resins you use, the more residue will be left over, and it leaves a different burn mark on the bottom of your smudge bowl. You can still clean it. It just requires a little bit more elbow grease, so to speak, if indeed you even clean your smudge bowls, because I know that I have friends who don't clean their smudge bowls and just continue to use the energy. I clean my smudge bowls because I like to go into each situation clean and clear. I don't like to bring the energy of one healing into the energy of another healing, or the energy of this house clearing into the energy of another house clearing. But that's my interpretation. Other people may see it as though they're just leaving the power in the bowl each and every time, and that the smudge in itself is a power. Whatever works for you, whatever your relationship is to your smudge bowl, whatever your relationship is to the ashes, is your relationship. I don't like to keep the ashes of my smudge around. I used to put them in a container, and then once the container was filled, I would take it out into the forest and I would put it in the trees. What ended up changing my mind about that for myself is because my smudges they're set with the intention of absorbing, not only clearing and cleaning, but if it can't get it out that way, for my smudge then to absorb the energy. And if it absorbs the energy, then it becomes garbage. I mean, I've got dirty energy. So if I'm leaving a house, or if I'm in my house, I generally leave the smudge ashes in the house that I've cleaned, and I put it in the garbage, or I tell them to put it in the garbage. And then when I'm at home, I will put mine in the garbage and clean my smudge bowls as it moves along. So that is one of the reasons for me. One of the reasons why I like to have more than one smudge bowl. And I've talked about this before, the reading of the ashes. So I don't want to bring the dirty energy from one house into another house, or the healing energy from one person into another person. So I want to keep my space as sterile and clean as I can. But that's my preference. Frankincense, as I just explained, was my very first, and it still is my beloved smudge. I do have friends who chew it like gum and have come into many ethnic restaurants with this burning in the very early morning on charcoal and being reminded of friendships that I have, relationships that I have, and conversations that I've had that have been very positive all around frankincense. And if you believe the mythology of Christ and being given the gold, the frankincense, and the myrrh, that for me also bespeaks a long-term relationship to frankincense as a means of currency, as a means of value, as a means of importance. So frankincense has been high regard. It is golden, and you give it to the golden. And I really quite enjoy frankincense. This is copal, and copal comes in different colors. It can be, and sometimes that's in the process of cleaning it. Sometimes that's in the process of what it will do for you. There are many different ways of making resins. There are different ways of harvesting the sap or what they take from the living plant in order to get the resin. There are different ways of doing it. There are ways that are harmful. I don't know if, regardless, different colors. Just be aware that copal comes in many different colors. Copal comes in black and copal comes in white. They come from different areas of the country, and I believe they come from the same genus, the same type of plant, but possibly two different types of plants. Copal is used in Central and South America as a sacred resin, much like frankincense is traded throughout Northern Africa and into other parts of that pan or that area in there. Copal is regarded as similarly as frankincense and has thousands of years of history and has been used in temples and sacred groves and ceremonies for many years. I was introduced to copal out of curiosity. I saw a resin in a little bag that said copal, and I then went home and used the computer machine and looked it up. Isn't that great? Isn't that great? Can you imagine if this was 100 years ago? Well, I probably never would have seen copal, but I certainly wouldn't have known if someone, if there wasn't a good orator, someone who had a good story for me to remember, then copal, I never would have experienced copal. It has a very different scent than the frankincense. Frankincense for me comes up the nose and it goes in and has a really high sense to it. Copal does as well, but I find that copal more focuses for me here in the throat and here in the upper bronchial. So for me, it's really getting things off my chest or getting things off your chest. So I really like using copal. I will use my resins, different types of resins together in one smudge depending on what I'm building or what I'm growing towards. This is myrrh. Myrrh can come in different colors. Frankincense is usually a high golden, but again, depending on how the resin is made, whether it's got a lot of sawdust in it or a lot of, stuff, depends on that. Myrrh can also be lighter, but it has a very different quality to it. It has more shiny, little tiny shiny spots. So you can see that there is quite a bit of difference. Now, this isn't the only color of myrrh. It's like copal. There are different colors of myrrh. One of the ways to find frankincense and myrrh, if you're interested in using them, I know I've mentioned this before, but if you go to a church supply store, they often will have frankincense and myrrh because it is used in their services and some of the church's services, so you're likely able to get some of that there. So I have copal, frankincense, and myrrh. I like to use frankincense and myrrh together often, and I will put copal in, but in a way, if I'm bringing in energy that I need from the experiences that I had with ayahuasca, or the experiences, the potency that I had in the teachings and the lessons of the Chicana. If I'm working with that type of relationship or energy, or if I'm burning for the snake and the serpent. The Maya people have a relationship, Central and South America, have a very interesting relationship with snake and with serpent, and they are used differently and interchangeably, right? So those are the three that I like. One other part of sacred wood that I found, much like the cedar, that I have a great relationship with, the Palo Santo is a wood. Now, I'm not certain how the Palo Santo tree is harvested. I'm not certain if spiritual tourism has created a burden on the environment. So I don't know if it is wise to purchase Palo Santo. I've had this Palo Santo. I had a small, a number of these, about 15 of these. It's very, very dense wood. It's very hard wood. So it's challenging to get slivers, but slivers are all I use for this. So please, before you purchase it, it's kind of like crystals too. Before you purchase this, try to find out what is the environmental impact of Palo Santo, and the fact that it is being used more. It has a beautiful smell, and it is often burnt solely on its own. It's not combined with anything else. It is a wood. It almost has a licorice smell to it for me. And it reminds me in a way of red willow fungus. Now, fungus is a fungus, so it's a hard fungus. So if I'm going to use the red willow fungus, I like to grind it because it is very hard and it's hard to break. And this then I can just use as a covering for my smudge, and brings in that beautiful smell of the red willow fungus, or the diamond willow fungus, whatever you want to call it. But back to the Palo Santo, so this wood is used in churches and is still used by the outline folk medicine and the people who practice folk medicine and their form of shamanism. They would use this wood in the same way that I would use my smudge. So this is it's become more popular because Peru and the spiritual tourism has become more popular. There are going to be more effects on the environment. And I'm not saying anything against the human beings who live so far below the poverty line that any money is good money. I'm not casting judgment or dispersions upon human beings who try to survive. I would ask that we try to be as ethical as possible when we are inviting spirits and pieces of the earth into our home, that we know where and how those articles, those woods, those crystals, those resins, those plants, how they've been harvested, whether it's been ethically. Anyway, you get the point. I don't need to belabor it. You get the point. I like these because they have very different scent. They have a different potency to them. They have a different love to them, a different energy to where they go, how they affect me. The red willow fungus is a great concentrator. As soon as I smell that, it's like smelling the sage. As soon as I smell either one of those things, I come directly into center, and it's like, oh, now I'm ready to go. Now I'm ready to move this together. And so I like the relationship that I built over the years, and the almost automatic response, or automatic response that my body has when it smells these to come into center and to come into spirit. But I do burn a lot of smudge. I do burn a lot of incense in my home. It is, especially when I'm home on the weekends, the first thing I do when I get up in the morning is I light a candle, and then I light from that candle, and I light my incense for the day, and I begin going to the kitchen and feed my crying cats and get on with my day. Red willow fungus, I put in the same category and the same love as these, but it is a different type of medicine. I don't know where you can get it outside of Alberta. I'm sure that you can. It is a very specific fungus. I haven't found a great deal of authentic red willow fungus over the years. I have found a lot of funguses that are being tried to pass off as red willow fungus. It has a very distinct scent. It has a smell in a way like Palo Santo, but deeper. For me, again, good things are going to remind me of black licorice. So this reminds me of a black licorice scent, but there really is a very unique scent. If you pick up the fungus and it has no scent to it, it is not the fungus you want, or that fungus is so old that it's lost its scent and possibly its potency. Those are different things to consider. And how you store them. Some people say never use plastic. Plastic is an evil thing. It'll bring in bad energy. You know, that's great. If that's your reality, all the power to you. That's not my reality. Now, this I also like. This is Lotus Root, and I happened to pick this up. I don't even know where, or if I could get it again. I have no idea. I like to use lotus. I talked about lotus in the book of Smudge. I've also talked about lotus leaves in my smudges. I have a relationship to the lotus because I have a relationship to the Buddha and the Bodhisattvas in the East. I have a relationship to enlightenment and the thousand-petaled lotus and the ability to shift the mind from the mundane to the sacred. So the lotus has deep meaning for me, not from a practicing Buddhist perspective, but as a symbol for enlightenment, for meditation, for consciousness. I really like the lotus. I like the lotus also because it brings water into my smudge. There are some things that bring water into the smudge. The lotus brings water because it grows in the mud, and it grows they grow on top of the water when they finally come up and the mud of it is also of that lower world, that unconscious aspect. Under the water is still mud. There's still something formed, or rock, in some areas, but you get the meaning. If I'm using the lotus root or the lotus leaf, it is because I want to work with opening the intuition. I want to work with the unconscious mind. I want to work with opening the pituitary gland. So I would mix this. I might mix just a touch of snake in there just because they're both working with clarity and intuition and enlightenment. I would mix this as well in a smudge that I am working with for ceremony and to create relationship to the divine or intuition, so that upper level consciousness, that super consciousness. Those are some of the different things that I really like in smudges. This is my idea of fun, is to create different smudges, to create recipes. What are the recipes for? I have different oils that I like to use. I won't go into those because they vary with respect to where you live and how to access them. I don't spend a great deal of money on my smudges or my gathering my smudge things, not because I don't place value on it, but because I'm very fortunate. And you don't have to use very much of anything in order to make your smudge. Like, you can use just a couple of drops of the copal. You can make just a sliver of this, just a tiny bit of the frankincense. You don't need much of it at all. It's like homeopathy. It isn't really the what you're ingesting as much as the intention and the potency of that medicine is what you're ingesting. So even though you may not necessarily smell the frankincense when you're burning your smudge, know that the frankincense is still working on that sacred level because it still is sacred. I keep all of my smudge things, including, my tobaccos and everything, together. I have a basket that I keep all of my smudge my smudge pieces, my smudge ingredients in. I like to also have that in my healing room so that the energy is just always moving through it and keeping it sacred. So it's not in my living room, it's not in my kitchen, it's always in that sacred space. I'm fortunate to be able to have another room specifically set aside for sacred and for healing. I know that many people who are watching this, you don't have that opportunity. I realize that living in the amount of space that I do is a luxury, and I'm grateful for the luxury of the space that I have. That concludes my journey through smudges for me. I hope you enjoyed some of my insights or some of my mental meanderings. And until next time, thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again in the future. I'm Cricket. Have a great day.